Ladies, gentlemen, non-binary beings, welcome to Facts Matter with Aton. This is our co-host Mookie. He will have more appearances and more time on air, but not today. Let's start off where we left off, and we're going to talk about progressive liberalism, and we're not going to go into so many tangents about Palestine today. Today, I really want to stick on point and talk about progressive liberalism and what it's effectively pitching to our societies. Progressive liberalism, in a nutshell, has this as its slogan: the ends justify the means. We know what's best for you. Ignore all the things that make your moral compass ring and just assume that we're smarter than you and that our end goal will be a utopia for all. Now, I have serious qualms about this, and I'll get into them a bit more later, but I want to dig more into this initial ideology that makes us believe that, we don't know right from wrong. When you look at the foundations of progressive liberalism, it's really rooted in the LGBTQ movement and gay rights, and how we kind of took a little bit too much time to make the wheels move in the early 90s, when many from my generation were already explaining to our parents why their views were backwards, why they needed to start looking past what previous civilizations, what previous religion doctrines have been, and kind of like understand that this is just people being able to express themselves and being able to be open about things that they couldn't before. Now, progressive liberalism would have us believe that we would never have gotten to the point where gay people could have weddings, or trans people could have equal rights, or they want to make it seem like we are so devoid of moral compasses, that our civilization itself is so morally repugnant that we would never achieve that feat without them, which I think is a complete farce and a lie. I think we were already well on our way to that. I think progressive liberalism may have moved that clock forward a little bit, but it certainly did not create that initial push towards advocacy for gay rights. So now that we have that very important notion of what progressive liberalism could ever claim to its gain to fame, let's say, or why it would know better than us, it's not true, because this was a movement long before we were ever hearing about open borders or all the other crazy stuff that progressive liberalism advocates for. Now, I want to move past this initial concept, and let's just frame it real quickly against the notion of what democracy is pitching us. So democracy is pitching us what? Equality for all, fairness, justice, inclusion, non-segregation, blending of cultures, which we see historically is actually the model to go to. If we look at France, we look at Britain, we look at Italy, we look at all the cultural centers of the world. And those cultural centers develop. Why? Because people from other parts of cultured worlds brought their knowledge to those centers, and eventually they all flourished. That's what the Renaissance is all about, right? Like when you look at places like Louisiana in the United States, there's your perfect example of how multiple cultures can blend together to actually create a new one, right? It was the Cajun people and the French people. They basically created a whole new American sub-regional group, right? And that's literally by blending in different cultures together. So this whole concept of progressive liberalism now advocating for segregation, this really worries me, because if history has taught us anything, it's that this is not the formula one uses to actually advance civilizations. And when you look at human consciousness, and you look at the evolution of human consciousness, let's do some historical fact checking. In 3000 BC, Nubian Egyptians were enslaving black people. In 900, or rather 850 AD, we had the Muslim Moor conquest of Sicily, where black Muslims under Muslim theology found a reason to attack Italy, basically slaughter all the white males. And these are facts of history, right? We can go on to when the British were rebelled against by the Americans in 1797. We can go on to the American Civil War of the 1860s. We can go to World War I in 1920, World War II in 1945. One can really argue that World War II and the end of World War II was really when human consciousness evolved to that next level where we had world peace for the longest period of time we've ever had up until recently, up until Putin basically erased all of the understandings that we had developed up until that point. So, what does all this boil down to? Well, it boils down to when progressive liberalism is pitching you that segregation is a good idea, that we basically need to eliminate everything that Martin Luther King has told us, and we need to actually adopt a model that's very more like what Malcolm X pitched for, where he basically said all the blacks in America should have to be deported to Africa, which I find absolutely absurd. But that's literally more of the ideology. Like, I don't know how you can argue that like we're working more towards the dream of Martin Luther King than we are Malcolm X, right? And that's really the bottom line when we're analyzing all of the things about progressive liberalism that aren't making sense, that really just, they defy human understanding, right? And literally there's so many inconsistencies that one can point out where nothing is really making sense. These are the questions you need to ask yourself, and you need to really sit and analyze and take into account everything that's been said, everything that's happened before, because if we don't analyze all of the facts and put all of the facts together, then we have their narrative. We have what story they want to tell, omitting all of the facts that could otherwise refute what they're saying, refute what their claims are, refute what their accomplishments are. So I encourage everyone to ask more questions, to analyze this further, and I will be delving deeper into this very soon. Take care and have a good day. By the way, we actually forgot some really important stuff. We got all into like racial supremacy, blah, 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 and I never really like tied it in for you. Okay, so what is the progressive liberalism movement really pitching us? And I'll tell you what it's pitching us. It's pitching us the concept that certain groups of racial people identified by a place that they came from are somehow beholden and entitled to rights, considerations, advantages that other people should not be privileged to, based on what? Based on where they came from, who they are, what their racial identity is. Okay, if that alone doesn't ring racial supremacy to you, let me go deeper into this, because you're going to argue that, oh, well, it's about grievances and it's about compassion. But is it really about that, or is it about taking advantage of those things instead of pride and conquest in the way that traditional racial supremacy movements have been advocating through? Because I would argue that all they've really done is exchange the crazy national pride for, hey, you should listen to us because you wronged us. You've proven you're evil. We know better. Trust us. We were the aggrieved ones. We have absolutely no reason to seek revenge or any of the other, morally depraved parts of human psychology that we should really just abolish if we actually want to move on, if we actually want to evolve. Do you think that the civilizations, ancient civilizations, do you think they remembered every past grievance that someone committed, some group committed at some point in time, and held that grievance as a bloodlust to take it out on those people 75 years later, 100 years later, 300 years later? Does this seem like reasonable human behavior to you? Because I would argue it's the complete opposite of it. I would argue that it's actually the kind of behavior that's a complete detriment to mankind and is the exact opposite way in which civilization has evolved, according to what we've been taught, according to what we can identify through facts, through historical accounts, right? Like all our textbooks, they can be analyzed. We can see how multiple cultures blended together. We can see how inclusion is actually the best option if we want to coexist. People argue that the Jews are bad, the Jews are this, Jews. We have coexisted. We seek to coexist. We do not seek to make you us. We do not seek to make you even see or adhere to our rules. All we want to do is coexist, and all we want to do it peacefully, and we want to even provide to the societies that have allowed us to coexist. That is really the fundamental that is what the average Jew actually wants. We don't want to rule you. We don't want to, our religion does not advocate for these things, right? To blame a couple bad Jews who are politicians and then label them as the rest of the Jews, that's a travesty, right? That's like saying every bad politician in Congress right now, well, he represents all the Americans and they're just as bad as he is. Is that true? Is that even close to true? I don't think it is. So when we examine, racial segregation, when literally the things that they're pitching are taking us backwards, when literally the things that they're pitching are arguing against what, the people who argued loudest and argued strongest and literally built the rights that you have today, when what they said is being thrown in the garbage and you're being told to listen to this new ideology that literally has no claim to fame, has never proven itself to actually be morally above, what us peons know, right? I would argue that any movement that claims that cleansing the Jews will make the world a better place, getting rid of certain racial groups or diminishing their authority will somehow make the world a better place, I would argue that's exactly what the Nazis were saying. I would argue that's verbatim. You can see the Nazi documentaries. You can see their videos, their propaganda videos. They were literally saying, we killed the Jews to make the world a better place. And that's what we're hearing on Harvard, UPenn, MIT, all the Ivy League schools. All these schools of supposed, great intellectual minds, right? Well, I think the intellectual minds have taken a break today. I think progressive liberalism and the people that installs into office, people who are not the smartest, people who are not the most qualified, people who meet certain diversity standard requirements, I think that's exactly how you get to a point where after 10 years of installing people like this, you get to a point where the children in that institution are being taught to behave the way that they are today, where that's literally their understanding of what it means to be extremely intelligent, is to hate Jews and to just blame all the world's problems on them. All right, that's what I wanted to finish up with, and that's what we're going to call it quits today with, and we'll be back more with more information tomorrow for you. Take care, and have a good night.